Much has been said about ChatGPT over the recent months. There's a lot of excitement going on, and as a physicist myself, speaking to physicists, I will try to focus on things that we can actually understand, both at the level of technicalities, without going into detail, as well as the broader level of, I would say, philosophy or the impact that such tools may have on us in the near future. Here you can find the links to the PDF version of this talk that will be on YouTube also. And I also would like to thank Jan Broniowski and Krzysztof Golec-Biernat for endless discussions which have contributed to what I'm going to tell you today. So first, let's start with the hype. I mean, this amazing excitement, everybody was talking about ChatGPT. The media are full of this. And not only ChatGPT, there is also Midjourney. There are other tools which allow us to produce graphics from text. So to Midjourney, you say, Med Professor Lecture, AI, crazy neural network, and this is what it gives you. You may like it or not, but you may generate very funny or even very beautiful pictures with these tools without having abilities to produce graphics otherwise. Okay, so let me start with firing ChatGPT and see what happens. So my first idea was that actually it would prepare the whole seminar for me. Okay, but this is not going as far yet. You know, it wouldn't include the graphics and so on. So I told him to, I say him, not it, yes, to write some pages of a seminar, but that was mostly useless. But if you tell ChatGPT to introduce yourself, it will do it. And first of all, it will explain what the name means. So it means generative pre-trained transformer. So generative means it can actually generate things and patterns and text based on things that he learned from the training data. Pre-trained means that he was properly trained. He learned what he had to according to the rules of neural networks. And transformer refers to a specific network architecture. So how actually it is wired deep down. This is what that means. So that's what GPT stands for. Okay, so after having this, and I had a recollection of you know, all the bad experiences from the past. So this is Sunday afternoon, and you need to write a homework for Monday to school. Okay, so because I had a Polish version, which here I tried to make it English and such with such authors that we perhaps all know. So Arthur Conan Doyle and Agatha Christie. So I say, I have a composition to write. Can you help me? Okay. So first, so it helps you. See, it just writes here rather useful hints, you know, in terms of items. Comparing them, you know, showing similarities, differences. It's amazing. You see, if you ask any other question of this kind of sort, it will do it for you. Then I said, okay, look, why don't you write this composition for me? You can say 200 words maximum. And he's going on and he writes a composition you can show in school and get, I would say, at least a passing grade, or maybe it would even be suspiciously good that the teacher wouldn't accept it, you see? So, wow, okay. So immediately you get a feeling here, you know, because these chatting programs, there's a long story. I mean, they didn't appear overnight. But the previous were really very primitive compared to this one, where you can actually have a conversation with having amazing feeling that this is a person on the other side. Okay, so well, the other thing is that frequently you have to write some pieces of text which have to do with administration or congratulation letters. So I told him, please write a sublime congratulation letter to experimental physicists who found the critical point of the QCD phase diagram by analyzing particle correlations 100 words maximum. Okay, good. Okay, I am prepared for the discovery mark. Okay. And you see, it does it. Okay, if you read it, I will not read it in full because of the time constraints. But you see, it's essentially good. It's at least what the English call waffling. Okay, waffling is smooth but contentless text. So actually, all the content that is present here is what was in my query here. So I said experimental, I said critical point, I said particle, all this kind of thing. So all these things appear here, and for a short letter, it is fine. If this was like a 2-page thing, then there would be a lot of waffling because he would not probably know so much about this unless he finds materials in his learned databases to do something like this. Okay, so this waffling actually is a problem. But here it is okay. Then you can go on. Actually, just when it was released, my colleague from Krakow, Jakub Zakrzewski, made an interview with ChatGPT on the situation in Poland, and that was published in this internet journal, Pauza Akademicka, with the link here. And then I translated this from Polish with DeepL. Okay? DeepL is a translator. And this is amazing. You say, why do Polish politicians brag they don't know physics? Brag is like somebody is actually proud of something. Yes? And they say, some Polish politicians actually brag and so on and so on. And then he says, for instance, without understanding scientific concepts and facts, politicians are unable to make rational and effective decisions on important issues, such as science and technology, medicine, or the environment, and so on. Look, I mean, this is as good as the politician's talk, you see. I would not do better than that. Programmer GPT, okay. You see, it is trained on this huge amount of internet data, which are mostly programs. So it's very good at programming. So here I gave him a standard topic that my students here will confirm that they have to do in our class, which is solving some typical, which is called the travel assessment problem for 20 cities. This is a detail, you see. But then you tell him to do this program. Then I actually did two queries because the first one had cities which were located on a, with coordinates which are integer numbers, and I prefer to have them real numbers so we can reformulate it. But anyway, you get a code with comments and with explanation below. The code works, I checked that. Also, if you wanted to have it in any other language, it will do it like this again. So you see, it can program simple things at this very colloquial stated query. Right? I don't need to be able to program to achieve the solution with a program written by this device. This is something which is a new opening, I would say. Okay, sorry. Poet GPT, okay? So how about that? You see, so you just, let's say, write a poem in the style of T.S. Eliot on a frustrated computer engineer trying to solve the mystery of consciousness. And then he goes on with poetry, which has rhymes. By the way, in Polish, it doesn't rhyme yet. Okay, maybe the corpus is too small. But here in English, look, in the vastness of machines abode, a weary soul, a mind bestowed with codes and circuits, wires entwined, a quest to parse the conscious mind. It reads very well. I'm not an English literature expert, you see, but it looks very good, you see. For consciousness, look at the last part here. For consciousness, a realm untamed resides in hearts, in love and pain. Not in the wires, not in the code, but in the human spirit's abode. So look, I mean, it's very humanistic. Look, I mean, it's amazing, you see, because it was not taught by teachers, by poets, universities. It didn't have any mentors. It just sort of learned in this machine way on the data. It's absolutely thrilling, okay? So you can't help asking the question, who is sitting on the other side? And this question actually was being raised over, say, the history of mankind, we could say, but the first first things that here are very much up to the point is a phrase by René Descartes, who in his treatise on the method said that according to him, he would say that it is impossible for it, so the machine, to assemble various words corresponding to the meaning of anything said in its presence, as perhaps the dullest people manage to do. Okay, so a fool can be, according to Descartes, of course, much better because he can converse, he can talk to you essentially. You see, so Descartes is saying machines would never be able to talk. On the other hand, Diderot, a century later, in his philosophical thought, said that if they find a parrot who could answer to everything, I would claim it to be an intelligent being without hesitation. So if somebody tells you something intelligent, what you expect, you call it an intelligent being. Okay, so is ChatGPT intelligent? I would say yes, although it may be wrong sometimes. Now, Alan Turing came up with what is now known as a Turing test, which is the most famous test of artificial intelligence. So essentially, you have three elements there. You have an examiner, you have a computer that can cheat, and a human that must tell the truth. That's important, that the computer can cheat and the human tell the truth. And the computer and the human communicate with the examiner by, say, by internet or by screens that they don't see, of course, immediately who is who, you see. And if the computer and the human are indistinguishable by the examiner in their answers, that means that the model, the machine, passes the Turing test. So in that sense, it's intelligent, okay? So we would, I think, agree, and now the community agrees, that GPT passes the Turing test. This is the image from Midjourney again, with a query Turing argues with Diderot. So, okay, so they put it in some costumes which probably are, I'm not an expert on that also, but maybe going back to 17th century. If you look at details of this picture, the funny thing is that Turing is in shorts, okay? But that's the English they do. They put this kind of clothes. And also he has six or seven fingers here. So it's difficult for this program to count the fingers. So it makes errors, although the impression it creates for you is fine, okay? If you look at the detail and so on, okay? So how it works. So now I will have the middle part of my presentation, which will try to explain how neural networks in principle work. And I realize that many of my physicist fellows, they actually don't know how it works because they never had to use them, or if you use them as some kind of ready tool. So I think it's interesting to understand how they work deep down, at least as the matter of principle. So there's first some vocabulary. So AI stands for artificial intelligence, and NI is the natural intelligence, which means the brain. Okay, and intelligence, of course, you can define in many ways, but this is recognition of the environment and taking decisions, increasing the chances of success in achieving the goal. And AI imitates cognitive functions of humans, such as learning and solving problems. It possesses intuition. So intuition is to be able to find a solution without knowing how you find it or why this is the correct thing, okay? When you play chess, you may have an intuition which move is good, which is not good, and so on. You see, over the last years or decades, we took it rather smoothly that AI can recognize handwriting, speech, also speaker-independent speech. I mean, this is what our Google phone goes to the servers and gives you the text version of what you say. Recognizes objects in images, does text translation better than people. Okay, better than people. Okay, so it's you have especially translation into English or from English, no problem. Yes. Now robotics and so on, you see, playing at the highest level in strategic games, creating, enhancing, faking reality. All these things we have experienced, and it didn't make so much of excitement or hype, as I said, as the ChatGPT. And the history, you see, is, of course, this is a long history because the history of AI begins with the emergence of digital machines at the end of World War II. But the recent period is this thing which call it a veritable watershed due to increasing computer power and development of algorithmic methods and unimaginably larger data. There are three elements which are needed for this revolution we are now experiencing. Increasing computer power, unimaginably large databases, as well as algorithmic methods. Let's not forget it. You see, best mathematicians, best computer scientists are working on these things to make it work. It is not highly non-trivial. Okay, so we know that the brain consists of biological neurons. Neurons are tiny computing devices, or like tiny cores, we could call it, okay? So what neurons do, they collect the signal on the dendrites from various dendrites, and this signal may be passed or blocked, you see? So the point is that it sort of controls the strength of the connections here, controls how much of the signals enters the nucleus, okay? So it has a program in this strength on the dendritic connections. Then if the strength in the nucleus is above a certain threshold, then the neuron fires the signal, then it travels along the axon and is passed through axon terminals and the synaptic connections to other neurons, okay? So you have, this is a brain fragment, the neurons communicate with other neurons with these synaptic connections, okay? And each neuron is a little core carrying out a very simple, we could call it here biological, so analog type of computation. Okay, this is all electrochemical stuff, very slow. I will comment on this one. So then McCulloch and Pitts in 1942, they made a mathematical model of this. So the model is that you have some input which would be numbers, okay? And then these numbers are multiplied by what is called the weights, okay? So the weights mimic the strength of the connection here, and they are summed in this S. So S is the sum of x1 times w1, x2 times w2, and so on. It's the sum over all these inputs times the corresponding weights. And then if the signal is stronger than some bias or threshold parameter B, then the neuron fires. The signal is passed farther. What the signal is depends on what is called the excitation function. The simplest one is just the step function. So if the signal is weaker than a threshold, nothing happens. If it's higher than the threshold, it fires. Okay, and then a typical neural network, which here is the feed-forward, is that you have this input layer where you have numbers, which then are passed to subsequent neural layers, and these edges here have all these weights, so the strength of the connections, and at the end you get the output. So these layers here are hidden layers. Deep learning has many such layers. So many means at least 5 or something, but no, typically 60 or 128 or this kind of things. So that's essentially it for the hardware. Now the question is how to make it work, okay? But there is a close one-to-one correspondence, both at the level of the neuron and at the level of the network. Of course, in the network here, we know that there are some connections which go back, so it may have recursive correction. This can be a more complicated structure, but that gave a lot of mileage in the, I would say, in all the applications of neural networks. Now, it's worthwhile also to reflect a bit on the brain versus the computer chip. They tell you, of course, that the brain has neurons and nerves, and they tell you we are so intelligent because we have so many neurons in our brain. This is, of course, completely wrong because the number is 10 to 11, yes, so this is 100 billion. But what a number is this? You see, this is nothing because 10 to 11 bits we have in a typical RAM, yes, on the 1 terabyte disk we have 100 times more, so it's not the number of the elements. Now the neuron activation time, so this is electrochemical, is 10 to minus, it's about the order of milliseconds. The operation time of things in computer chips are they go at gigahertz frequency, so it's 10 to minus 12. You see, you have so many orders of magnitude in speed. Signal traveling speed is 100 meters per second in nerves. And essentially, this is in nerves which are healthy, where you have this myelin sheath, which was on the previous slide here. Okay, then if you have this myelin sheaths, then the signal travels 100 meters. If you don't have them, as I said, some nerves transmit only at about 1 meter per second. So when you drop a hammer on your toe, you feel it immediately that it happened, and then you feel the pain actually about a second or so later, yes, because this is the time that travels up to your brain with these nerves which don't have the myelin sheath. But anyway, these are fantastically slow speeds compared to the speed of light traveling essentially. But this is in medium, so it's maybe not exactly the speed of light, but we are again talking huge orders of magnitude here. Now, interestingly, the power of the brain that is thinking is about 100 watts. And the computer processor takes a similar amount of power. So the power is similar. On the average, you can make an estimate here that the neuron fires every 6 seconds only. So every neuron in our brain, on the average, fires only once per 6 seconds. Okay? And if you combine all the firings, you get about 3 gigahertz. And this is the same as on a typical clock of a computer chip. Okay? Now, you see the amazing thing is the number of connections, because as I said, on the average, the neuron is connected to 1,000 other neurons. So you have 10 to 14 synaptic connections. And every neuron, it can be as a weak core. So you are talking about a system which has 10 to 11 cores in this processor. If you treat the brain as a processor, it has 10 to 11 cores. And you see, on the other hand, the CPU architecture has a few cores, and the GPU architecture has about 100 cores. So the GPU is better for this neural network application because it has more cores, but it's obviously very, very far away from the... So the brain is actually an extremely parallel and connected device. And this is why a small and slow brain is an amazing device because of its massive parallelism and connectedness. And now the point is that people try to mimic this in artificial neural networks. Okay, so we try to somehow go into what the brain can do, and of course we cannot do the wiring, right? That's what we cannot do. We can just put a lot of transistors, but we cannot connect everybody with everybody because everything is two-dimensional. Yes, so when we do the thing on the silicon chip with some copper layer on it, you just have things which have to fit on the plane. So even topologically, you have limitations on the connections, right? But let me start first with an example. Okay, so I will now try to explain some basic algorithmics on this in this field, and I will talk about the classifier. So this is actually has nothing to do with ChatGPT as it is, but as a beginning, I think it's a good example. So we want to have a network which will tell us if the point is inside a circle or outside the circle. So you see, I have a coordinate system, I have a circle, and then I have points which are inside here, red, or outside, blue. And do you see, of course, I mean, since we know geometry, we could write the inequality for the point to be inside the circle. If this center has coordinates 0.5, 0.5, and the radius is 0.45 as chosen here, for definiteness, that is the formula, obviously, right? But now suppose that I give you this point. Is it inside or outside? Well, we could go to that equation and compute, you see, but then you might try to guess a bit, you see. So you can guess properly or improperly. Well, this was a bit outside, so that would be a difficult one. And we can continue the game. And you know, after a while, you probably would be able to recognize, is it inside or outside? I would say it's probably inside because the first coordinate is, the second one is very close to the center, and so on. So without doing the computation, I can decide. And after a while, I would probably get an experience how to do that. And now we are using this kind of principle in the training. So now recall my MCP neuron. So there is some input, it's multiplied by the weights. So I compute the sum here. The input may change, the weights remain the same, okay? So for this case, it was greater than 0, so the neuron fires. And if I took some other weights, for instance, for the same data, the answer would be different because the weights define the functionality of the neuron, so then it wouldn't fire, okay? And then if you have some network like this, so it has some weights which are taken from somewhere, okay, maybe random. You have some input. The signal travels forward, yes, so the black one is the signal that reached. It's positive here, the threshold is 0, so it fires 1 farther down. And you see here it was negative, so it's 0, but here it was 1, and so on. You see, you go all the way down, and this neuron would not fire. This network would not fire with this data, yes? And another one would fire. And so this is the game, you see. So essentially, we now have to choose some kind of architecture. So I say how many neurons I want to have here, how many here, how many layers, and so on. And I have my xy, my coordinates on the plane, which can be inside or outside the circle. And I want to have that R, the response, is 1 if the point is inside the circle, and 0 if it is outside the circle. I want to adjust all the weights here in such a way that it works. Here is a color code, which means that blue is a negative weight, red is positive weight, and the thickness reflects the size. I don't want to put the numbers, I just put the color code because it's easier. You see, anyway, these weights are in some sense irrelevant. I want to have a black box, a device which is working according to that very simple principle. And of course, the answer of this neural network may be correct or not. And then the crucial thing, I mean, I will not read it in detail, but you can find it in my book here. Essentially, there is a very simple procedure and genius in its simplicity, which is called the backpropagation algorithm. So each time the network gives you the wrong answer, and you know it, you see, because you know for your test sample, you know that a given point belongs to a circle. If the answer is correct, you are happy, you do nothing. If the answer is wrong, you have an algorithm to slightly modify the weights, that it has better chance to be correct. This is the essence of what is called the supervised learning, and believe it or not, it works, but you have to repeat it very, very many times, you see. So you call it training, and all these networks are trained, and here it would look like this. So you see, this was terrible at the beginning because I was starting with random weights here, but then you continue with this backprop algorithm, and you see that after some 10,000 epochs, so epoch means that you have repeated 10 times running through your points from the sample that you have prepared. Yes, you have to have a sample of points of which you know that they are inside or outside of the circle. And then when you continue this learning process, you see at some point, you see the blue region appearing, and after 50,000, you essentially have a good classifier. You see, if you go to a large number like this, you could say that you are happy and you get the classifier. You see, from a trivial, you see, it's a triviality thing essentially. Yes, you just have numbers here which you multiply by some numbers, and then you have these activation functions here, and you repeat it in certain layers. In the end, it is working. Incidentally, to physicists, you have many parameters. You say, okay, do you have local minima? The answer is yes. You repeat the procedure many times. Each time you will get a different network with different assignment of weights, but each of them would be working equally well. So there's no problem of local minima because every local minimum works equally good. I don't think anybody knows why this is so, but this is so. Okay. So comments here is the following. There's a train network that recognizes if a point, now I can take new points, and they will classify for me in the circle or not. But look, where is geometry? Where is Euclid? You see, where is the equation of the circle? Nowhere. It does not have that information. You see, it just has some interpolation or some interpolative information of features like this, right? Nevertheless, it works. You see, so it sort of gets intuition based on prior experience. Looking at the weights of the AAN, if I show you this, you would never be able to tell me what these machines do by taking them. You would have to start using them to see what they do. Okay. You see, learning is laborious. I needed many epochs, but the use is very fast. This is a typical phenomenon here. A single neuron is very simple, but thanks to their large number and numerous connections, we experience emergence of a highly complex behavior. You see, so this is known as emergence in the complex systems theory. There is no functional coding in a sense that I would not put any function, any formulas in the guide. I just have some universal code and a test sample. We don't write functional programs in neural network algorithmics. And now, you see, the big jump is that from our simple classifier example to advanced artificial neural networks like the ChatGPT, the jump is in the size, many neurons and layers, dedicated architecture. So the architecture is different what I was showing you here. And the training is on huge databases. Okay? And there's different training strategies, advanced algorithms going on. So the breakthrough of recent years had to do with multiple layers of deep learning, and people learned how to train such networks, trainable computing power and new algorithms. But the basic idea that is behind the success is very similar to what I told you. Okay? It just scales up very much. And scaling up means that you can get new behavior out of this. And the architecture of advanced neural network is assembled from simple pieces like the Lego bricks. So how does GPT look like? And I'm not going to explain this, and this is on purpose in small code that you cannot read it. But the point is that people, the architects of these games, they know exactly how this is constructed. Okay, so it has a specific architecture with these neurons which are in layers which are connected. There are some sub-layers here, these are details and so on. But there is something that they can actually draw, plot, and they can deal with this and they can train it. Now, ChatGPT, we know more precise data on the version 3.5. The version 4 is already they don't advertise the details. So it has 175 billion, where billion is 10 to the power 9 parameters, or weights, and a few hundred layers, okay? So in my little example, I had of the order, I don't know, maybe 70 parameters. That was the number of edges. I had 3 layers, yes? So this is obviously much more. Now the data was the total length of the data used for training was 500 billion words, mostly what they call the common crawls. You know, we are talking here, and the internet programs, they crawl to all the pages and they look and they collect the content, right, of the internet. So to give you the idea, you see, only 3 billion words is the Wikipedia out of this, so a tiny fraction. Now the query length, so the maximum length you could input into ChatGPT is 50 pages of text. Training required 10 to 23rd floating point operation. Floating point operation on the computer is like a multiplication or addition of numbers which have 4 bytes, yes? So they have, a decimal point in the middle and so on. So this is the basic operation, okay? The cost of a single training was $50 million. And the trained model is about 10 times too big to run on a single GPU of a laptop, okay? So therefore, you will not be able to download it and run it on the laptop. You have to use it by the network. By the way, we all are always impressed with the complexity and the cost of lattice QCD simulation. So lattice QCD, the typical lattice QCD simulation has typically assets of 15 teraflops. So that means it can do 15 tera. So tera is 10 to power 12 operations per second. Okay, and this is how lattice QCD calculations are done, which typically take weeks or months, you see. To compute this number of operations that are needed to train ChatGPT would take over 600 years. So we are talking about three orders of magnitude more costly or time-consuming calculations than used on lattice QCD simulations. Now, how GPT works, okay? So actually the task is simple. You see, you give a string of words, a query, and you have to generate the most appropriate next word in the answer. Then the next word and so on, yes? So it's all about sort of correlations, how to complete a sentence. There was this, social game. You see that you would write part of a sentence, somebody had to complete it. So this is essentially all about this. Now I will not maybe read this because of the time constraints, but I will only mention that the GPT is not connected to the internet itself. You see, it was just trained up on the data with some cut in 2021, and now it is sort of an autonomous device, autonomous black box that we talk to. Okay? So it's all about correlations. So if I tell you blonde, what is the next most probable word? Marek? Girl. Yes, so the girl would be the most probable girl, maybe woman. Okay, so you see, okay. Maybe let's not discriminate men here, okay. So then what would be the next one? Well, he could or she could enter or smile or whatever. You see, the point is that if you would think that, say, a big vocabulary of say, English has half a million words, okay? So if you wanted to encode binary correlations, you would have this number squared, which is 250 billion numbers, if you wanted to really literally encode all correlations, you see. But the point is that most of them are obviously zero, you see. So this is called the sparse matrices. So you don't need so many. You need actually very few. Even when you take now multi-word correlations, this is all very, very sparse, you see. So therefore, if you think about this number of the number of, say, pairs here, this is more, 250 is more than the 170 parameters that the GPT has. But the point is that with 170 billion parameters, you can apparently do all the correlations very properly, like we do, because it can talk in a smooth, very fluent way, only sometimes making something funny, you see. But most of the time it's amazing. So you can sort of generate all the correlations between long strings of words in such a way that you can fit it in a small number of I would now call it the number of parameters in GPT small, if you think of the number of the basic tokens, as they call it. Yeah? So it's something very, very subtle here, which I think also surprised the authors. Now, this didn't appear overnight, and there are these large language models, which here is the very recent developments of all these guys here. So look, I mean, this is very dense. Now, Stanford people use this llama-based alpaca, which performs similarly to ChatGPT on limited tasks, which is an open source model, and training costs about $600. So we really have tools for amazing things cheaply. Okay. Just the beginning. Okay, all started actually with a seminal paper by people who were from Google that appeared in December 2017, and then the title, "Attention is All You Need." Here is the link. And you see prior models for language recognition used recurrence. So the signal was sort of traveling back and then was returning in a recursive loop. And then, of course, you cannot make it parallel because you have to wait for the answer. And they were the first who noticed that actually in these models you don't need this recurrence. You can do with sort of feeding forward, which allows you to parallelize massively the algorithm. And that made it possible to train such large models. And that's when things have started. And there was also, we played, in our classes here, we played with early versions of GPT and also the BART and so on. And then these early versions a few years ago were very, very primitive. Compared to what you have now, it's amazing what happens. And this is just the size. So now the question is GPT conscious? Okay, because we know it passed the Turing test, so it is intelligent, but is it conscious? Of course, you could ask what consciousness is, but you see, if you look at the model which was recognizing the points in the circle, that was it, okay? So that was just a collection of numbers here, represented by this color thickness code here. So, okay, could it understand what is a circle? Does it understand what it is doing? Obviously, we would say, don't be kidding me, obviously not, right? I mean, this is just multiplying and adding and filtering, and that's all. You see? When you come to larger models, there is what is called the Chinese room paradox, which was a polemic with the Turing test. The polemic was raised by the way, Midjourney gives you a couple of options when you say Chinese room with two windows and books. And then you can choose the one that you prefer, and you can still modify it until you get something that you... Okay, so the Chinese room paradox was brought up by the philosopher John Searle, who made the following thought experiment. So imagine that you are locked in a room with two openings. With one, you get questions on cards written in Chinese. You don't speak Chinese yourself, but you have detailed instructions, algorithms in the room on how to deal with the strings of pictograms and what string of them to generate in the response which you pass outside through the other hole. So you converse in Chinese without having a slightest clue what you are talking about. So you see, he says that you can perform an algorithm which behaves perfectly intelligently. However, the algorithm or whoever is executing this has no idea what he's doing. Okay? So therefore, computer processing is not through reason endowed with consciousness and so on. There is, of course, a materialistic viewpoint here that maybe it's a matter of size and extending the program to include other domains like senses, emotions, and associations with them, and having a control system like morality and so on. You see, maybe when you make a more complicated network with different sorts of input, actually such kind of early attempts of these things are actually been done in programming. And that, therefore, you see, questions about AI are in a way questions about ourselves, because we run also a neural network in our head, right? So learning is a consolidation of synaptic connections between brain neurons, which is the Hebb rule, you see. So we also learn. So it's interesting. I mean, I think this is, but this is not maybe the room of going this. Now we talk about the problems that people realize. So the problem is with this large language model, hallucinations, confabulations, and waffling. Waffling is some speaking without, no, it's a text without context, you see. In Polish, it's lanie wody, okay, so this is one. Okay, so asked, who is Wojciech Broniowski? And ChatGPT 3.5 said Wojciech Broniowski theoretically. So, you know, most of the things are correct here, okay, in Kielce and so on. He has held position in various other academies, including, this is total bullshit. I was never at the University of Tennessee, not even for a seminar talk. And Rzeszów, you see. I never got an award of the Polish Physical Society. So this is a confabulation. This is just completely wrong. They fixed it. Now look, people from AI fixed this. How did they fix it? You ask ChatGPT-4, says, as of my knowledge, cutoff state, Wojciech Broniowski is not a well-known public figure. It is possible he might be a private individual or a less prominent figure in a specific field. If you could provide more context or detail about who you are looking for, I might be able to. So you see, when they tell you that they fixed factography in ChatGPT-4, they just removed sort of certain things. Okay, you see, there is this very good presentation of the author, of the boss of GPT. There's ChatGPT that we all talk, and there's also the GPT, the engine itself, which is a more internal thing. Yes. And to this GPT, you can, for instance, show a photograph. He was showing this. He was showing the photograph of the content of the fridge, and that was giving the recipes that you can make from the food there, without any other feedback, influence of feedback. Or he wrote on a piece of paper a skeleton of a web page he would like it to do, and he just looked at the photograph, at the handwritten notes and sketches, and he made a skeleton web page in HTML. Or it filled a text return form based on very colloquial equals. Look, I live with my wife. I want to join, I want to file a joint tax return. And we had this and this, and we bought. So, and then it's just prepared filled forms, you see. So for the convenience of life, this is very good. Now, no details on GPT are revealed. Okay, now superhumanism. And this I have in Polish. I was trying to translate this, but actually Polish is better than English for this. So there was a different homework in Polish where it was supposed to compare the works of Byron and Mickiewicz, okay, the Romanticism period. So it wrote the composition, then the one-sentence summary is here. But then you say, I sort of copied this film I mentioned the previous slide of the author of GPT that it can do on one letter. See, so then you say, do the same, but just put all the words with beginning with P, of course, except for Mickiewicz or Byron, you see. And that you see, you have this word, this sentence with words starting with P. How about K? Das, kreacje konstruowane przez Byroniewskiego, że komponują konwergencje, kwitnące kwestie kondensacji. Everything starts with K. Could you do that? With J also, you see. So look, I mean, I could not, we are not trained of using the synonyms with such a fluency. By the way, there's a book by Len, Cyberiada of 1965, where actually this kind of games are being played. Okay, so this is nothing new, but this is amazing. So is it a superhuman era now? Can this machine be more powerful than we are? And the answer is yes, or if not now, it's just the question of time. All right? Now, singularity. You see, look, this is the number of parameters in big models of the language, image generation, vision, and other. And this is time. This is year 1950, 2020. You see, this is already on the log scale. And this goes up on the log scale strongly. So this is what they call singularity. This is from the writer Werner Wendt, and also there's this Nick Bostrom, who is the guru of philosopher and the guru of this transhumanist movement. You see that we are actually the intermediate link between some lower intelligence and then some superhuman intelligence, which would be obviously in machines. So the technological singularity, which means uncontrollable growth, robots taking over, doomsday, and so on, you see. But also, perhaps we are experiencing the creation of consciousness, superhumanity, or let me be a bit blasphemous here, maybe soul, you see. if it's only the question of size and various inputs, more complicated inputs that we normally deal with, not just text, everything. What we breathe, what we experience, all the pheromones which reach us, all the temperature sensors which tell us it's nice, you see, all the, say, bodily instincts or needs that we have, that we are getting hungry, all these kind of things. Perhaps that should be all combined in some being, or maybe you can get rid of some unnecessary stuff. You see, so these are all the things which have to do with this post-humanism ideas, and Nick Bostrom is a guy probably to read there. By the way, it's a serious guy. He's an Oxford professor, you see. Okay, so advantages, disadvantages, risks. Okay, so you say advantages. So homework writing, commemorative speeches, product description. So you see, if you want to have some advertisements of products, he can do better than the person that you will hire from, 6,000 per month. So much better. Actually, we tried this. You see, it is good in setting up text summaries, quizzes, exams, writing simple programs, websites, poetry, art, all these kind of things. Now, what it means, I think, in the very short time scale, it means end of school as we know it. So the class stitches up for subscriptions now to get GPT-4 without limitation is $25 per month, and you are state of the art, and there is no point, and it's impossible to detect, ban, or prosecute the use of GPT. By the way, you remember my T.S. Eliot style poem? I put it into the detector if something was written by ChatGPT, so that's called GPT-0. I pasted in the poem here. The answer was your text is likely to be written entirely by a human. I like the entirely here, you see? So this is not possible to detect, especially the text is short. Why? It's random, you see, it's always, each time it's different. It's not like the plagiarism that is very easy to spot. So actually the future homework at school would be who will write a better prompt to ChatGPT-9. That one gets the good grade, right? Now, revolution the job market. So I'd say the basic IT specialists, graphic designers, advertising agencies, people of average mind, IQ less than 110 or so, will become unnecessary. So new tools will require new specialists, like the prompting engineer would be a new one. It's something which already exists. You can take classes, there are fora, about how to write the prompts. Now, if there's a rich tool, it always creates engineering around it, and this is what we are seeing here. Now, hallucinations, waffling, weak in math as a language model. So there is no use in science per se as yet of this kind of tools. No use in science, thanks God. I mean, for us, it's a very good thing, right? I mean, so there's nobody who will replace us in this thing. It has very poor or no sense of humor. It tells really unfunny jokes. This may be partly due to the fact that this is, at the end, this is trained by people in order just to remove the offensive content and so on, you see. So you cannot have, all the jokes which are, there are, yeah. And only such jokes, for some people, only such jokes are funny, maybe that's my problem. Okay, now you see the danger, it can fabricate indistinguishable from truth, profile fake news on an unimaginable scale. You see, and also crime instruction, hacking, impersonation, spamming, phishing. You see, up to now, a hacker would have to know how to program, no more. I mean, now anybody can actually become a hacker. You see, just write, you just ask ChatGPT to write you some proper code. Maciek is saying no, you see, but the point is that there will obviously be fight at, I would say, the higher level of security and risks that are there, okay? So a brilliant tool, obviously, yes, and this gradual strenuous development can lead, and in this sense, I think with ChatGPT, it has led to a phase transition. So we have some incredible acceleration. And the widespread use of such tools will happen whether one likes it or not. So everybody can become an artist, programmer, or a thief in the future at that level. Confabulations at this stage, yes. The network does not know when to say that it does not know how to reasonably ask for details, take the initiative, and so on, you see. Final here thought that with which I will leave you is the following. ChatGPT has 150 billion parameters, which is 5 times 10 to 12 bits. And the brain has 10 to 14 synaptic connections. Of course, it's not maybe completely proper to compare them one to one, but it's only 20 times more that we have. Only 20 times more. So, of course, we are, by evolution, we probably have a much more clever algorithm inside. You see the short-term memory, long-term memory, all this kind of. We have to sleep to make an order to it, and we sort of we learn all our lives. Yes, we can update. We have plasticity of the brain with all these kind of things, which the neural models that we have at the moment don't have. But on the other hand, these models have, I would say, even more flexibility than we have. And if this is the question of the size, it's only the question of time when we reach superhumanity there, I think. Yes, this is all. Thank you very much for